The man laughed at the faith of the poor elderly woman, and the next day he was surprised to learn of the miracle that had occurred. The morning sun bathed Evelyn Thompson's garden in a golden light, turning the flowers into a spectacle of vibrant colors. At 78 years old, Evelyn was a woman of serene presence, and her face, marked by time, reflected a life full of stories and overcoming challenges. Sitting on a wooden bench that creaked softly under her weight, she caressed an old rosary that hung from her wrinkled fingers. Each bead seemed to hold special significance, each whispered prayer an echo of her unwavering faith. "Dear God, take care of me and those I love," murmured Evelyn as she watched a hummingbird approach the flowers. The image of the small bird, vibrant and full of life, brought a smile to her lips. "Thank you for giving me beauty amid the pain." Across the street, Richard Morrison, a 45-year-old businessman, watched the scene from his office window. His modern house, with its straight lines and large windows, contrasted with the cozy home of Evelyn. He always considered her a peculiar figure, a woman who clung to her beliefs with a tenacity he couldn't understand. Richard, with his practical and skeptical mind, saw no sense in prayers and promises of a world beyond what the eyes could see. As he gazed at the flower-filled garden, memories of his childhood flooded back to him, moments when faith was a natural part of his life. But life had been hard on Richard. The loss of loved ones and disappointments over the years had distanced him from any belief. "How can anyone believe in a God who allows so much suffering to happen?" he murmured to himself, his eyes fixed on Evelyn, who seemed so calm, so confident. Unable to bear the sight of the woman praying any longer, Richard decided to confront her. He left his house, his heart racing at the thought of discussing his convictions. As he crossed the street, he began to formulate his words, preparing for the clash. He had always been direct and incisive, and this time would be no different. Evelyn looked up as she heard Richard's footsteps approaching. The smile she always carried faded a little upon seeing his stern expression. "Good morning, Richard," she said, trying to brighten the atmosphere with her presence. "Good morning, Evelyn," Richard replied, his tone colder than he intended. "I can't understand how you can spend your days here, murmuring prayers. Do you really believe that makes any difference?" The question sounded like a challenge, and Evelyn lifted her head, looking him in the eyes. "Faith is what keeps me alive, Richard. It's the hope that gives me strength to face each day. Believing in something greater helps me cope with the pain life brings." "But life isn't like that, Evelyn. We can't just wait for someone or something to save us." "That's just an illusion," he said, frustration showing in his voice. "And yet, here I am, living and finding joy even in the small things," she replied, her calmness contrasting sharply with Richard's agitation. "Faith isn't about having all the answers, but about finding peace amid the chaos." Richard frowned, feeling uncomfortable. He had never seen faith in such a personal way. To him, it had always been an abstract concept, something people used to justify pain and injustice. "And how do you feel when pain knocks at your door? When everything seems lost?" Evelyn smiled again, a smile full of compassion. "Pain is a part of life, Richard. But faith teaches me to see beyond it. I am not alone. I have never been. God is with me, and that is all I need." Richard shook his head, unsure how to respond. There was something in her determination that deeply unsettled him. He turned to leave, but not without casting one last glance at Evelyn's garden, where the flowers danced gently in the wind, as if they too were in prayer. He didn't understand, but he felt there was something there, something he could never touch, yet that inexplicably drew him in. Richard Morrison walked through the streets of his neighborhood, the weight of the bet he made with his friends still fresh in his mind. He couldn't help but smile with satisfaction at the memory of their incredulous expressions when they heard his proposal. If God really exists, he will help that old woman out of her predicament. Richard knew his statement was provocative, but for him, it was a way to reaffirm his disbelief. The idea that a higher power would care about Evelyn's life was absurd. Meanwhile, in her modest little house, Evelyn Thompson continued her tranquil routine. She was sitting at the wooden table, with the soft morning light streaming through the window. In her hands, she held a worn rosary, a reminder of the difficult moments she had faced over the years. For her, each bead of the rosary represented a prayer not just for herself, but also for those who had already departed. Her faith was a refuge, a fortress that kept her strong in the face of adversity. "My God, I don't know what tomorrow holds for me, but I trust that you are by my side," murmured Evelyn, closing her eyes with a slight smile. She believed that even without asking for help from anyone, divine providence would always find a way to take care of her. In her mind, there was no room for doubt. Life had tested her, but her faith kept her standing. That afternoon, Richard met his friends at a nearby bar, where they discussed life and its challenges. The topic soon returned to Evelyn. "That old woman is in financial trouble, and you really think God is going to do anything for her?" one of the friends asked, laughing. Richard, in a scornful tone, replied, "I bet that if God really existed, he wouldn't let a woman like her go through this." As laughter echoed, and the bet was made, if Evelyn received divine help, Richard would lose the wager. At home, hearing the echoes of his own logic, Richard felt victorious. He convinced himself that, deep down, he was merely helping to deconstruct the faith of someone he considered naive. However, a small voice inside him whispered that this bet could end up changing everything. He ignored that impulse, focusing on his convictions. Meanwhile, Evelyn continued to pray, her thoughts distant and serene. "If there is a plan for me, Lord, may it reveal itself in due time," she thought, believing that life, despite its difficulties, could always bring surprises. The warmth of the sun and the gentle breeze of the late afternoon brought comfort to her heart. She had no idea that, in the shadows of Richard's skepticism, a transformation was about to take place. The next day, Richard was in his office, surrounded by papers and charts, when a colleague mentioned a rumor about an anonymous donation made to Evelyn. The words echoed in his mind, and a wave of unease washed over him. "It can't be true," he thought, trying to dismiss the doubt. "This must just be a coincidence." Yet, curiosity led him to ponder what could really be happening. "She may have received money somehow, but it won't change anything," he told himself, as he decided he needed to investigate further. The challenge he had set for himself now seemed like a test of his own determination. Richard could not allow Evelyn's faith, the woman he always considered weak, to triumph over his skepticism. He needed to find out how this donation had come about and, above all, prove that her belief had no foundation. Richard was about to be swept away by a wave of emotions and revelations that would challenge his convictions, but he still didn't know it. Life, in its essence, was about to surprise him, bringing forth truths he never imagined facing. And as he prepared for this journey, Evelyn continued her routine, confident that, somehow, everything would work out. The distance between them, though palpable, was about to be bridged by circumstances beyond their control. The morning after his confrontation with Evelyn, Richard woke up with a strange feeling. He was in his living room, the sun filtering through the linen curtains, but his mind was elsewhere. Evelyn's words echoed in his head, like a persistent echo. "Faith is what keeps me alive." He got up, sat at the breakfast table, and as he took a sip of coffee, his phone vibrated. Looking at the screen, he saw a message from a neighbor. "Did you hear about the anonymous donation Evelyn received? It's a considerable amount. Enough for her surgery." Richard felt a chill run down his spine. What he thought would be a mere bet among friends was transforming into something that challenged his skeptical logic. He quickly grabbed his car keys, his mind racing with questions. How could someone donate such a large sum without revealing their identity? And why would anyone do this for Evelyn? He needed to find out more. Arriving at Evelyn's house, the aroma of flowers enveloped him. He remembered the well-tended garden where she spent hours caring for the plants. The sunflowers, always turning towards the sun, seemed more radiant than ever. When he knocked on the door, he felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension. When Evelyn opened the door, her smile lit up the room. "Good morning, Richard. What brings you here so early?" she asked with a sparkle in her eyes. "Hi, Evelyn. I heard about the donation. Did you really receive a large sum?" Richard couldn't hide the incredulity in his voice. "Yes, my dear. It was a surprise for me too. But you know, I don't worry about the source. I believe that God always takes care of me," Evelyn replied, with the serenity that characterized her. "Don't you wonder who did this?" "It could be someone who cares about you," Richard insisted, trying to understand how she could be so calm in the face of the unknown. Evelyn let out a soft laugh, as if she were sharing a secret. "Richard, my son always said that life is full of mysteries. Sometimes, we just need to trust. And believe me, I trust." Intrigued, Richard decided he couldn't let this pass. He said goodbye to Evelyn, promising to come back to visit her, but his mind was already elsewhere. From that moment on, he found himself immersed in an investigation. He talked to neighbors, asked discreet questions, but nothing. No one knew where the money came from. He felt frustrated, as if he were chasing a shadow. Meanwhile, Evelyn spent her days in prayer, more confident than ever. The hours turned into days, and Richard couldn't forget the peaceful expression on her face. Her faith intrigued him and, at the same time, challenged him. For him, everything needed a logical explanation, but there was a woman living in a world where faith filled the gaps. "Why don't you ask for help, Evelyn?" he asked during one of his visits. "If you're so excited about the surgery, maybe you should find a way to thank the donor." Evelyn looked at Richard, with an expression that mixed compassion and wisdom. "Richard, gratitude doesn't always need to be expressed with words. Sometimes, simply living with faith is the greatest form of thanks we can offer." The answers Richard sought seemed further away. He returned home that night, reflecting on what Evelyn had said. What was happening to him? That woman, with her unwavering faith, was somehow breaking down his barriers. He felt a growing frustration, but also a subtle change within himself. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. The questions piled up in his mind. He wondered if it was really possible for faith to move mountains. And what if that mysterious donation was a true miracle? He could no longer ignore the feeling that was beginning to blossom inside him, a spark of hope that challenged his skepticism. The next morning, Richard decided that he could not simply sit still. He needed to dig deeper, to discover the truth about the donation. Thus, the journey that began as a bet turned into a quest for answers, a path that would lead him to confront not only the mysteries of Evelyn's life but also his own. Richard was obsessed with the revelation. The anonymous donation that had saved Evelyn from a complicated surgery intrigued him deeply. He felt like a detective in a mystery he could not unravel. His restless mind questioned how this could happen. The idea that generosity could arise from nowhere challenged him, especially after so many years of skepticism. He sat at his dining table, surrounded by documents he had collected, as the afternoon light filtered through the curtains. "There must be a logical explanation for this," he murmured to himself. The sound of crumpled paper echoed in his mind as he reviewed every clue he had. What was once just a game among friends had now become a personal quest. He picked up the phone and called the bank, determined to trace the origin of the donation. "Hi, I would like to inquire about a bank account." He started, but was interrupted by the attendant. "Sorry, sir, but I can't provide information about accounts without the account holder's authorization." Frustrated, Richard hung up the phone. He leaned back in his chair, thinking about how he could obtain the information he needed. A thought sparked in his mind. What if the account was in the name of someone who has already passed away? He remembered his father. Although he had a complicated relationship with him, the idea that there could be a hidden legacy intrigued him. A legacy that could explain the donation. In the following days, Richard immersed himself in a marathon of investigations. He began to search for records of old bank accounts, legal documents, and even old family friends who might have information. Each new clue seemed to bring him closer to a truth he wasn't sure he was prepared to face. Meanwhile, Evelyn was preparing for surgery. She was calm, as always, and her faith never wavered. In her small room, surrounded by flowers she had received from neighbors, she murmured prayers of gratitude. Each word was an affirmation of her belief that she was being cared for, no matter what happened. Hope illuminated her face, and she couldn't help but think about how life always found a way to surprise her. One morning, while having her coffee, Evelyn decided it was time to call Richard. Despite his skepticism, he had become a constant presence in her life, and she felt she needed to speak with him before the surgery. "Richard, can you come over for a moment?" Her voice was soft, but there was a determination beneath it. "Of course, Evelyn. What happened?" He couldn't hide the concern that crept into his tone. "I want you to know that, no matter what happens, I am at peace. My faith sustains me, and I trust that everything will be all right." "Well, that's good, but aren't you worried about the surgery?" Richard asked, still grappling with the idea that faith could truly bring comfort. "No, dear. Worrying won't change anything. What gives me strength is the certainty that I am not alone. My loved ones are with me, and so is God." Evelyn's eyes sparkled with a serene light. Richard felt uncomfortable yet fascinated at the same time. He couldn't understand how someone could have such certainty. "Evelyn, do you really believe that God sent that money?" He hesitated, trying to internalize the idea. "I don't know where it came from, but I feel it's a sign of love. Love never dies, Richard. Sometimes, it manifests in ways we don't expect." Her words echoed in his mind, challenging his deepest beliefs. In the meantime, Richard continued his search. He sifted through his father's documents and, in an old file, found a bank statement that left him in shock. The account had a considerable balance and was registered in his father's name. But what impacted him the most was the date the account was opened. It was 1 month before his mother's passing, a detail he had forgotten. "How is this possible?" he murmured as the weight of the revelation began to form in his heart. Richard felt a mix of anger and confusion. His father had helped Evelyn in secret, and he had never known. The connection between the two seemed to grow stronger each day, and that scared him. He didn't want to believe that kindness could exist in someone he had always viewed with distrust. But the truth was right there in front of him, ready to be uncovered, and Richard found himself on the brink of an internal change he didn't know how to process. Meanwhile, Evelyn prepared for her surgery, her unwavering faith being her greatest support. She was unaware that Richard's search was about to reveal secrets that could change everything between them. Richard was in his study, surrounded by scattered papers and a growing sense of confusion. He had spent the past few weeks trying to understand the mystery of the anonymous donation that had helped Evelyn. But now, with the new discovery, everything seemed to make sense and, at the same time, crumble. The account that had been opened in his father's name revealed a side of the man he had never known. Richard took a deep breath, feeling a knot in his throat as he recalled moments from his childhood when his father always seemed distant, troubled by matters that had never been discussed. He decided to go to Evelyn's house. The path to her place was filled with memories and conflicting emotions. As soon as he arrived, he found Evelyn in the garden, as always, tending to the flowers with a care that only she possessed. The scent of the flowers mixed with the fresh afternoon air, creating an atmosphere of peace that contrasted with Richard's internal turmoil. "Evelyn," he began, hesitantly, "we need to talk." She looked up, visibly surprised, but smiled with the same kindness she had always shown. "Of course, Richard. What happened?" Richard hesitated, searching for the right words. I found out something about the donation you received. Something about my father." She frowned, intrigued. About your father? What did you discover? He stepped closer, feeling the weight of the revelation. The account that made the donation was in his name. He opened it to help you, in case you needed it. Evelyn's eyes filled with surprise, and she slowly rose, as if his words needed time to settle. Your father was always a kind person, Richard. But I never knew he had a special affection for me. Richard felt a tightness in his chest upon hearing those words. I didn't know either. To be honest, I always thought he was just a cold, distant businessman. This discovery changes everything. Sometimes, people have sides we don't know about, Evelyn replied, her voice soft yet firm. Your father's kindness was a part of him that you may not have seen, but it was there, even if hidden. I feel like I never really knew my father, he admitted, his voice cracking. And now, knowing that he cared about you, it makes me think of many things. Richard paused, looking down, trying to organize the confusing feelings that overwhelmed him. Richard, love and kindness exist in small things. Sometimes, a gesture can change someone's life without us knowing, Evelyn said, as she approached him, placing a comforting hand on his arm. Your father may not have shown his kindness in the way you expected, but he had a generous heart. That's what scares me, Richard confessed, a bit calmer now. I thought faith and kindness were just illusions, and now I find myself facing a reality that challenges everything I believed. Evelyn smiled tenderly. Faith is a path that reveals itself slowly. Sometimes, it's necessary to look back and see what is hidden in the lines of life. Your father left a legacy of love, and you can choose to honor it. How can I do that, Evelyn? Richard asked, his voice faltering. How can I reconnect with that part of him that I never knew? Start by practicing kindness, as he did, Evelyn suggested, with a sparkle in her eyes. Help others, share your time and attention. And who knows, maybe one day you'll find your own faith in the process. Richard watched her, feeling a wave of gratitude. He realized that the connection between them, founded on kindness and understanding, was stronger than any belief he had dismissed. Thank you, Evelyn. I never thought you could help me understand my father and myself. We're all on a journey, Richard. Sometimes, the answers we seek are closer than we imagine, Evelyn replied, with a warm smile that lit up her face. As they talked, Richard felt a new hope beginning to blossom within him, like the flowers growing around them. He was not only starting to understand his father, but he was also opening up to the possibility that kindness and faith could be part of his life, just as they had been in Evelyn's. The revelation of the past not only connected him to her, but also guided him towards a future he had never imagined possible. Richard was walking toward Evelyn's garden, his heart racing. He still couldn't believe the revelation about his father. The anonymous donation that had saved Evelyn's life came from an account he knew nothing about, and the idea that his father had cared for her left him confused and emotional. Spotting Evelyn sitting on her wooden bench, surrounded by colorful flowers, he paused for a moment, admiring the serenity she exuded. Evelyn, he began, his voice trembling. Evelyn looked up, and a soft smile lit up her face. Richard, dear. What a pleasant surprise. Are you here to visit me? Actually, I have something important to tell you. He hesitated, searching for the right words. I found out where the donation you received came from. It was from my father. Evelyn furrowed her brow, a look of understanding mixed with curiosity on her face. From your father? But, how do you know this? I investigated, Richard replied, pausing to gather his thoughts. He had an account that, apparently, he used to help people. And you were one of them, even without me knowing. Evelyn's eyes sparkled with an emotion Richard couldn't identify. Oh, Richard, that is wonderful. Your father always had a generous heart. He cared for others, even when he seemed so distant. Yes, but I didn't know that. I always saw him as a cold man, someone who didn't care about anything but business, Richard confessed, the weight of the revelation crushing him. And now, knowing that he cared about you, it changes everything. Evelyn smiled, a smile full of compassion. Sometimes, people have sides we don't know about. Faith, Richard, is about believing in what you cannot see. Your father knew I needed help, even without knowing me well. How have you always had so much faith? Richard questioned, curiosity shining through his voice. How do you manage to believe in something you can't see, especially after so many losses? Evelyn looked up at the sky, where some white clouds floated slowly. A faith isn't just about believing in something greater, Richard. It's about love. The love we have for people, for memories, and even for the pain we endure. It's what keeps us united and gives us strength. Richard felt a wave of conflicting emotions. He had spent so much time distancing himself from faith, from the idea that love could exist beyond pain. I want to understand more. I want to know how it's possible to live this way, with so much hope. It's a long journey, but it's worth it, Evelyn replied, her voice soft like a spring breeze. Hope is like a seed. You can plant it and water it, and one day it will bloom. Your father did that for me, and now you can do it for yourself. He watched her, admiring not only her strength but also the genuine kindness that radiated from her. Evelyn, I want to do something meaningful. I want to start a foundation in memory of my father, helping people in need in the community. I want his legacy to live on and make a difference, just like you do. Evelyn smiled, tears of joy shining in her eyes. That's wonderful, Richard. Your father would be so proud. And you will also find a new purpose in that. Richard felt a new hope growing inside him, like a flame that was beginning to shine. I promise I won't leave you alone. I'll be here to support you, just as you've always been for me. The two shared a moment of silence, feeling the connection that was growing between them. It was a friendship forged by love and faith, an unbreakable bond that defied all adversities. Shall we go to church together, Richard? Evelyn suggested, standing up and adjusting the flowers around her. It's a good place to start this new journey. Yes, I would love that, he replied, a sincere smile forming on his lips. Let's go. As they walked side by side, Richard felt the transformation within him. He had not only discovered a new side of his father, but he had also found a new path for his own life. With Evelyn by his side, he was ready to face the future, now illuminated by the faith and understanding that had once seemed so distant. Sometimes, life surprises us in unimaginable ways. Have you ever experienced something like that? Share in the comments and subscribe. Did you enjoy this twist? Then leave your like and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to turn on the bell to receive all notifications.